everyone. I'm Jennifer Marshall, co-founder and executive director of This Is My Brave, and welcome back for BraveTV. This is episode 13, season 1. We first must thank the Alkermes Inspiration Grant COVID-19 Relief Fund for sponsoring this season. Today's episode is in honor of Veterans Day, coming up this Thursday, November 11th. Veterans mental health is a very important topic. According to the Veterans Administration, we lose approximately 22 veterans every day to suicide. We need to do what we can to learn about, intervene, and prevent veteran mental health issues. To learn more about firsthand experiences, we have 3 guests joining us today. Nicole Smith, veteran of the United States Coast Guard and Hampton Roads 2020 storyteller. Bernard Hines, a veteran of the United States Army and 2020 Hampton Roads storyteller. And also Jen Householder, an Army reservist and Air Force veteran. We can't wait for you to meet them. Nicole, Bernard, and Jen are incredibly accomplished mental health advocates who each have not only served our country, but have battled the internal fight against mental health and now give back to help others. We are so honored to have them here today. So let's get started. So let's start with Nicole. Can you give us your short intro?
Absolutely. So thank you again for having me. My name is Nicole Smith, and I served in the United States Coast Guard for 20 years. I just actually retired almost a year ago. So this November 30th will be my 1-year retirement. I'm still a military spouse. My husband still serves on active duty, and we're currently transplanted, what we like to call, in the Chesapeake Bay area of Virginia. And we have 3 wonderful boys. So that's kind of life now, is this transition piece.
So my name is Jennifer Householder. I am been in the military for 22 plus years, active duty Air Force, and then I switched over to the Army National Guard and the reserves to fly the Black Hawk. Deployed a couple of times, and so when I'm not playing Army as a reservist, I work for the Air Force as an engineer here at Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado Springs.
Hi, my name is Bernard Hines. I am a retired Army veteran. I did 20 years, 7 months, and 4 days in the Army, and I retired. I have a beautiful wife and 4 beautiful kids. I call her my partner in my recovery to help me with my recovery. I currently live in Chesapeake, Virginia, and I'm also a professional comedian, and I just left my government job. Yes.
Awesome. You guys are amazing. I didn't realize you all have around the same year's experience. So that's really cool. So let's jump in and talk about your personal experience in dealing with mental health. So does anyone want to jump in and kind of tell us a brief history of their own experience with mental health?
Well, I'm happy to start with that.
Go ahead, Jen.
So I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And that, of course, had some long-term effects. And it wasn't until my second deployment to Operation Iraqi Freedom, and, combat introduces some additional trauma and stress there. And so all of it I kind of hit this culminating moment in 2009 on my second deployment where I was suicidal because everything I had tried to do to heal wasn't working. And so for me, I kind of hit a point of mental and emotional anguish. And it wasn't until getting through that deployment, getting home, and then learning about some cutting edge therapies that address the physiology, the biology of trauma, that I finally got a breakthrough in my healing. And that's something that, as we'll talk about, that's something that I share whenever I'm teaching my soldiers and airmen about resilience.
Thanks for sharing, Jen.
Well, I would say mine's is PTSD. Coming back from Iraq, did 2 tours in Iraq, and it was right near my retirement, like at 19th and 20th year. I was in the war, and I had got numb to living. I got numb to even dying. It was like, okay, if I die over here, I guess that what was meant. And just going through and no emotion and just playing like Russian roulette every day. Like, okay, we got to the point where we were joking like, all right, is this today? Is this today? And when that stuff starts becoming normal, and you feeling that way, that's when you get numb to life. And today is November the 2nd, where we are recording. And on today, we had 7 people, not today, but on this date, 2006, we had 7 people in my unit get killed on a helicopter. And I had just got off that same helicopter. So that feeling that every November, because we have a Facebook group, we talk about it. So you really never get away from that feeling of being back there. So you just have to go to therapy and just, deal with it the best you can.
So mine, so I struggle with anxiety, depression, and I'm also diagnosed PTSD. But I didn't know I was really living or dealing with those things early on in my career. I'm knowing now, like doing the work, the inner work, I can understand that it relates and ties back to like childhood stuff and things like that. But it definitely started to stem and to magnify once I joined the service. And, when you come in at such a young age, and, you're still trying to figure out who you are and, where your place in the world is. And now you're trying to figure out where your place is in the service, on top of just the missions that you do. I just remember like my first kind of like, I guess, shocking moment was at my first unit. And, with Coast Guard, our job was search and rescue. And one of the first traumatic moments that I remember was we were told that there were 3 children that had fallen into the water and we were going out to rescue. And quite quickly, it went from rescue to recovery. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And they're like, well, there's no way that they're alive. And I just remember like this feeling like, oh my gosh, like, what are you talking about? I don't know if I'm ready to, recover somebody. Like I want to rescue, I want to bring them home and bring them home safe. Like that was the whole reason I joined the Coast Guard to begin with, is because I wanted to save lives. I wanted to be in service of others. And so that was like this first, like just shock to my system that that's not what it was always going to be. And so it continued to just kind of build upon that throughout my military career. But then also there's just the more senior that I got, the more responsibilities, and also just, other challenges that I was faced with. I kind of started to build on this feeling that like I couldn't have these emotions. Like if I teared up, then I was weak or I was being too much of a girl. And so I just learned to, suppress it. And as Bernard was saying, I really kind of just started to push emotions aside completely. And that was my way of being strong and like just compartmentalizing the entire situation. And that got me through, almost to the point, like I just forgot to have emotions at all. And that's really where, again, as Jen was saying, we'll talk as to like some of those breakdowns, but really what led to my breakdown.
You all have been through such extraordinary events in serving our country. And, it's like we have talked about in a previous episode of BraveTV where we talked with first responders. It's that almost that hero feeling, like you feel like you can't show those emotions, but maybe that's one of the barriers. So could we dive in maybe to another question in terms of what are some of those barriers that veterans and our active service personnel encounter when they are addressing their mental health?
Well, I like to say when the war first kicked off in 2003, that's when we started going. So every time we came back in 2005, and they didn't have what they have now set up for us. When we came back, they said, do you need to talk to somebody? I've been going for a year. No, all I want to do is see my family, have me a beer, and make love to my wife. That I don't want to talk, because back then it was like, if you go talk to somebody, what they're going to do is keep you back, and you're not going to be able to go to your family tonight. So everybody was like, yep, we good. Yep, we good. Yep, we good. And we had to let them know, you need to ask those questions 90 days and 6 months after the person get back, because now you're getting involved to your family. Now you taking over the bills. Now your wife is like, you've been gone, or your spouse been like, you've been gone for a year. Here are your kids. So now you're supposed to jump right back in. So that was the biggest problem, because the first time I went to Iraq and I came back, I had PTSD then, but I didn't know I didn't understand what it was. I thought it was a whole lot of stuff. So I went right back to the war again with not being treated. So it was like compound on compound. And like I said, it's three of us up here. So I say PTSD is processing traumatic situations differently. Everybody processed their trauma totally different. So whether you went to war 10 times or whether you went to war 1 time, it doesn't matter. Trauma is trauma. So I'm glad they have better places now for veterans to seek help, because it was like, you ain't going to talk to nobody. No, you better not. They'll take your clearance. They'll do. So it was so much junk they was talking. So we was misled.
I'll jump off that and mimic what Bernard just said, because that was my piece. Was what I did in the military. I held, high security clearances. And so I was in command centers. I was locked behind, closed doors. I had no windows. And that's where I lived for, 12 hours a day on, just continuous rotations. But because of that was the story behind it is, you'll lose your clearance. If you even, start to even think of saying that you have any like mental health issues, that's just where it was going to lead. And, I remember at the midpoint of my career, actually having a shipmate that, just didn't want to be on watch. Like, that's all it was. And, just started saying crazy things. And the next thing we know, like, he was being discharged out. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is true. Now behind the scenes, knowing there's a lot more to that story, but it really just, all my mind was focused on is like, oh my gosh, like, I can't talk about anything. I can't let anybody know. Like, I've got to deal with this by myself and just suck it up. And that was also kind of a lot of those other barriers that I started to hear was, Nicole, you're a female in the service. So if you want to be looked upon as a strong leader, like, you've got to, really build a backbone of steel. You have like a spine of steel and a strong backbone. Suck it up, buttercup. Like, all of those sentiments that, you kind of think people are joking around about. I heard them a lot throughout my 20 years. And so that in and of itself kept me quiet. And, after a while, you're just like, well, I've been living with this so much. It may just be me. Like, this is just how I'm meant to be.
Well, and just to piggyback on both of you, completely agree. I mean, I have a clearance, and that was always a fear that, if you went and got help with a mental health professional, that you could lose your clearance. Well, and why is that a big deal? Well, my resource, what gives me purpose is what I do in my job. Like that, I found purpose in that as a pilot. That, that was a resource for me to even though I was struggling with suicidal thoughts and the anguish from my childhood trauma, and then compounded by combat tours. And though I had sought help kind of under the radar, right, because I had to keep that under wraps. I had to hide getting help, because losing the resource of being a pilot would have been more detrimental for me, because I that was a resource. That gave me a reason to live, to keep pushing forward. And so I think part of that is that stigma that we still, even today, even with all the help, we're still struggling with that. And I think part of the reason why we're still struggling with that is the understanding that trauma and stress is actually more of a biological situation than it is a mental. So this thing about mental weakness, this thing about, oh, you went to see mental health. Well, can I just tell you that for me, in order to change the narrative in my brain such that changing those suicidal thoughts did not come about until I addressed the biological impacts of my trauma and stress. And it's kind of like, when I look at my helicopter and I look at, if you ask me to go save a guy off the side of a mountain, but if I'm down to one engine, or if my hoist mechanism isn't working, well, I can't do the mission. Well, it's the same thing. If parts of your brain are degraded or offline because you're in survival or threat mode, or the impacts of chronic stress or trauma that hasn't been resolved, well, it's impacting you. And that needs to be addressed first before you can change the narrative in your brain. So that, for me, I think that one of the things that I have been on it's been my mission is, whenever I teach about suicide prevention, whenever I teach about resilience, I always explain you've got to address the physiology, bottom up first.
Wow. I'm glad you said that, because my therapist had a model of the brain. And she took, and she showed me the part of the brain that was injured. No one ever showed me that. Yeah,
my therapist did the same thing.
Mental health, but when someone shows you the injury and explain it and breaks it down to you, then you're like, okay, I have an injury.
Yeah.
I'm not weak. I'm not this. I have an injury. In order to get back right, as you said, I have to go and take care of this injury. And
it's not a disorder. It's not a disorder. We need to drop the D out of it's post-traumatic stress. It's not a disorder.
Correct.
Our bodies and minds are designed to heal. Mm-hmm. We just got to give it what it needs.
So true. I love that. And so let's go to that overwhelming statistic, which may be even low on the scale of 22 a day veterans that we lose to suicide. Because if stats are underreported, what can we do to help prevent veteran suicide?
I think this is part of it. It's having the conversation. It's putting faces out there that people can relate to and be like, wow, they wore the uniform, or they wear the uniform. I can't tell you, so I kept hidden for about 18 years of my service, and I didn't start talking openly until those last 2 final years. And looking back, I kicked myself in the butt, because the conversations that I had with my peers and my subordinates were so much more honest and pure. And that whole time where I felt that I would be a strong leader if people didn't know my emotions was so beyond wrong, because they saw me by what was on my collar rather than who I was as a person. And when I finally stripped that away and we started having conversations and I got to know who they were as a person and what their challenges were and what their struggles were, I was more respected then, because they respected me for what I had to do, but they respected me, and we got through things so much better because they saw me as a human being who related and had the same types of dealings that they did. And so I think that that's the biggest piece, is we're not really going to start chipping away at anything until we start relating and sharing openly like this. And it needs to start happening in more on our bases and, in front of our service members.
Well, yeah, I like that, because when I got out, I retired in 2006. It was 6 months after I got back from Iraq that I retired. So I had no really adjustment. I went straight from military, straight to civilian life, straight to working for the military. But once I started seeking help and started realizing something was wrong, I reached back to my soldiers that I still had connections with. And when they saw, as Nicole just said, when they saw Sergeant Hines went and got help, and how open I am about my struggle, and I never want to glorify the trauma, I want to glorify the recovery.
Yes.
And getting that and hearing some of my friends say, man, because of you, I went and sought help. Because of you speaking out. And that's the stigma. Even though I bring mine into the laughing part, but sometimes that's the way you got to feed it to somebody. You know, sometimes you just can't say, hey, man, something wrong with you. You need to go get help. No, you have to, bring it to them however way you can. But this stigma, the stigma is real. The stigma is real. And some people we're not going to help, but some people we are going to help. And that's what I look forward to, is just hearing someone say, man, because you spoke out, I went and got help. Because when you have this PTSD or you have a mental, you feel like you're not, what can I give to anybody? I can't give nothing to somebody. I'm not who I used to be, but you're not who you used to be. But now you're a better person of who you are because you are opening up yourself and giving to others.
Yes, I'll let Jen jump in here, but that just reminded me of something as well, is there's a sentiment. So because of that, all of this that I've done, I decided to become a life coach. And one of the sentiments that I lean on is that we can only take our clients as far as we ourselves are willing to go.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is very much true as well, is, if we're going to also open the dialogue, like we, as those that have gone through it, have to be the ones to talk about it. And it was so eye-opening for me, like when I started, sharing my story and being more open and public and vulnerable about my experiences. Like the whole time when I was doing that, I felt alone. I felt isolated. I felt like nobody was going to understand, that nobody but me was going through this, which we know is not true. But I didn't see it in anybody else. To me, like everybody else looked like, they had their crap together, their jobs and their families were flourishing. But then once I started becoming open about it and sharing, not only did they feel more comfortable coming to me, but I was also more capable of seeing it in others. It was like the blinders fell off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a term and I forget it, but it's like when you buy a red car and all of a sudden you see red cars, or you get a haircut and everybody has a haircut. It was that same thing. It was like, holy crap, I'm not the only one, and I can start recognizing it in others. And when you're able to do that, then we're able to help others a lot more.
The power
too.
of that, your experience, using
yes,
for
absolutely.
Good. Yeah, it's so true. Jen, what do you think? What can we do to help prevent veteran suicide?
Well, I think both of them hit it on the nail that, as leaders, we have to, as officers and senior NCOs, we have to, we've got to share and be transparent. I remember the first time I was vulnerable and I shared about my struggle with suicide, which interestingly, that was more difficult for me to share than the fact that I had been sexually abused as a kid. Like that was easier to share that than, let me admit that, yeah, as an officer, pilot, all that, I struggled with suicide. I was going to, give up essentially. But to share that, but I felt that it was important, and I will never forget sitting in a training with my brigade. And, when you get that those butterflies in your stomach and, you're supposed to say something. It's like this pushing me, like, say it, Jen. And so I stood up in front of all of these, and most of them were junior enlisted. And I'm like, well, I'm going to be honest with you. And it was funny because we were watching, not funny, but interesting. We were watching Pittsburgh Steelers, Terry Bradshaw. He did a thing for us in the military. He struggled with suicide. I didn't know that. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but I did not know that he had struggled with that. So we're watching that as our suicide prevention. And then I feel that push, like, hey, get up there and share. And I did. And that opened the door to what would be for the next how many years that I would share my story. And I can't tell you how many times, even just as recently within the last year, I had one of my E5s come to me and she's like, nobody has ever told me that you could heal or how to heal. Now, she didn't tell me her story. She was private about her situation. But the fact that, the more that, like what you both said, the more that we can communicate and get the truth out, that it's not a life sentence. Trauma, the post-traumatic stress is not a life sentence. There is healing. Yes, it does take work. It does, but there is healing, and we don't have to stay in that place of pain. I am so glad that that I stumbled upon what was life-saving, the information from the Trauma Resource Institute and other folks who use cutting-edge therapies to help me heal, because the truth is we don't have to stay in that place.
So true. There is a path to healing. You all have found it, and I'm so grateful that you're here talking about it with us and with our audience, because it needs to be shared. Where would you guys say, point to some resources where veterans and family members can get support, maybe places that have helped you, places you've heard of that we can share in the comments? Anyone want to throw out a resource?
Well, yeah, I just mentioned the Trauma Resource Institute, so that would be one.
Yes, definitely.
What I got, my biggest thing was the vet center. There are in locations is the vet center. It's not the VA. It's part of the VA, but it's not. I mean, they have groups, they have therapists. That's where I got my one-on-one work from. And it's so great that it was made for when the Vietnam veterans came back. And it's got so great that I got my father to go, and he's seeking therapy because he is a Vietnam veteran. So sometimes you get in there and it's all about the mental health, and it's one-on-one, and you see others and it make you feel, better. So I'll say the vet center in your local location.
So for me with Coast Guard, definitely we have our work life, and they can set you up with, outside resources for, therapy and things like that. But after I retired is actually when I started looking into like some other resources. I actually was working temporarily with Navy's Fleet and Family, and the Fleet and Family centers through the Navy have some phenomenal resources outside of classes, and it's not just for the service members, but it's also there for the families. And those are taught through the life skills department. And then they also have counselors and therapists that are there on site, which I absolutely love. And they can come in if, depending on like the urgency of it, sometimes they can get seen that same day. But another one that I'm actually going through right now, just, to help not only with my own stuff, but as I mentioned, my husband's active duty as well. But NAMI, they have a class called NAMI Homefront. And that one is actually geared specifically for the family members to help with what their service member is going through. So it helps them understand the terminology. It helps them understand how to advocate for their service member. And I really love how that one is laid out to be able to really make it, Bernard was saying, with his wife, and that, having to have her learn, to be part of this healing. It's a huge piece, because we hear so far too often, our service members struggling with this, and then they wind up getting divorced, or, it just causes all these rifts within their family dynamics. And that's the last thing that we need when we're, in this, I guess, quote unquote, hell. We need those closest to us. So the NAMI Homefront one is really awesome and powerful, because they're helping to stop that and actually make it a family healing process.
So that's amazing. I thank you guys for sharing those resources. I want to dive deeper into one, Jen, specifically, that you work within, because all three of you have gotten active in the advocacy world. And so can you share kind of from your different points of view what you're doing now to make a difference in veteran mental health? Jen, would you start us off?
Sure. So the Trauma Resource Institute is where I learned a lot about the biology of trauma and stress, and then afforded the trauma therapy that, or received that, a biological-based trauma therapy that helped start to clear out the effects of my trauma. So right now, so they have two models. One's for therapists, and then one's for, those of us who are not therapists. So I'm a trainer in the community resiliency model, which teaches sensation-based skills to regulate your autonomic nervous system, which I found to be fundamental to resetting the biology, so then I could heal, then I could change the narrative in my head. So that coupled with, so I'm a master resilience trainer, both for the Air Force and the Army, I went through their training. And those are mainly cognitive-based skills. But when I started coupling this stuff together that I learned, and then also applying like a system of systems engineering approach, because that's what I do as a civilian, I started to look at resilience as an integrated system of systems, where if we want to totally optimize our resilience, well, we need to be engaging all the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, the mental, and the social aspects of our resilience, and understanding how they integrate. So, and how they're interdependent. And so I'm writing a book right now, and I've started a company and a program where I teach that. So it's a bit of a hybrid between what I've learned from the Trauma Resource Institute and then what I've learned from being a master resilience trainer and just as an engineer.
Incredible.
Well, what I do, since I left my government job, I became a certified peer recovery specialist. And I wanted to be the type of person, as a comedian also, I want to be the type of person that I want you to understand about therapy. That's why I wear a shirt that says straight out of therapy. My job is to get that person to trust me. Now, once you trust me, then I want to hand you off to the resource. I'm not the resource. I'm the one that gains that trust. If you in that hole, I want you to say, here, let me give you my hand and let me get you out this hole. Now you are safe. Now let me get you over to the resource to help you with your skills and stuff like that. So that's really laughter. I go to the VA hospital. I did comedy for the spinal cord units. I did comedy for the employees. My goal is to say, yes, I battle with PTSD, but I'm still functioning. So you can still be functioning too. And my goal is to just have that person trust me and then give them off to the resource.
That's so important, Bernard. I mean, I love that. You're putting that name and face and, owning your story and really letting them relate to you and then connecting them to the resource that will keep them on that recovery path. Right. That's awesome. And Nicole, what would you say?
Yeah, I have to second that. I think that having that rapport and building that trust is crucial. And that's really what led to my path is because there were a few times during my struggles while I was on active duty that I did seek out help. And, went through this service to do that and was paired up, with like a counselor or therapist, but that wasn't the support that helped and worked for me. And that was something else that I also had to learn to understand is that we can, as Jen was saying, healing is possible, but healing looks different for each and every one of us. Yeah. And mine wasn't through a therapist. I felt when I was going to some that I was like just a number, or that, they were trying to push me in one direction of like what was wrong. And that was not what was wrong. So I stopped going. And it wasn't until I literally had a full-on breakdown and wound up in the hospital from a major anxiety attack, laying there, very much like Jen was saying, like I was dangerously close to becoming a statistic at that point. And that was at 15 years in my service. And I already had my 3 children and something had to switch. Like I could not allow myself to go down that path. And so I did kind of like what Jen was saying. I went out and I found my own help. And that was by finding a life coach. And it was like a 180-degree difference. And it was because of what Bernard was just saying, is that we built rapport. That was something that I did not have with the therapists or the counselors. They wanted to know about me. And not only did they want to know about me, but they let me in on their story. And, realizing that and being like, feeling like we were in it together. And like, I had somebody giving me their hand and like, I've been in this hole before and I'm going to help you get yourself out because I know the way out. That's what helped me, and that empowered me for when I actually got out of the service. I became a life coach myself. And so that's now what I do. I'm a life coach, and I work one-on-one with clients, primarily women, who are burnt out. Because that's essentially what happened is I started just going down that path of trying to suppress the emotions, trying to do all the things, thinking I could keep up with all the things, 100% in service of others, but 0% in service of myself. And I see that far, far too often with our service members. And so I come in from that standpoint of having that experience and having that background to be able to give them that hand and say, all right, shipmate, let's get out of this. And we're going to do it together.
And thank you for bringing that up, Nicole, that, you know, it's not a one size fits all. Like you might connect with a therapist, you might have a better connection with a life coach, and that's what you need. So really being able to look into different avenues for recovery is so important.
And the key is, like I said, resources, whatever resource might be. And one thing, my faith played a good part in that too.
100%. I'm right there with you. Yeah. If it weren't for my coming back to faith, who knows where I'd be.
You're right.
Absolutely.
Well, you guys have shared so much that is just it's such a wealth of information, resources, personal experience. I'm so grateful. I want to wrap up by going around, and if you could share one parting sentiment or like your favorite quote that really helps you through, or a favorite piece of advice that's really helped you on your mental health recovery journey. I'd love to do that. It's one of my favorite ways to wrap up BraveTV. Who wants to go first?
Notice nobody's rushing now.
I know, I kind of threw that out at you guys. I didn't really warn you on that last question.
You know, honestly, I would just say that there's only one of you. There's just one of you. And you were brought into this world for a reason. And that, you know, when you're in the thick of it and life just seems like it's just too overwhelming and there's nothing left, you've just got to dig deep and you've got to seek out help, or say, you know, it's not okay. That's kind of become one of my slogans. And it may seem cliche because it's said a lot, but God, if it ain't the truth, and that's, it's okay to not be okay. You know, and I mean, I made a post not too long ago in a Facebook group that I run for, you know, some of my clients and stuff. And I literally posted there, I was like, today I'm not okay. And I was like, today I want to scream. Today I want to cry. And, you know, it's okay for us to have those days. But I think that's the most important part that we need to remember, is that it's okay to be vulnerable in that. You know, nobody's perfect, and we need to stop chasing that. So that's what I would share, is that it's okay to not always be okay.
And one I would share is, no is a complete sentence. We get overwhelmed sometimes with trying to do everything, trying to do this, saying yes to this, saying yes to that, saying sometimes you just have to say no. And that's a complete sentence. That's it. I really don't have to explain why I said no. And then, this is one thing, my therapist, she gave me some great quotes, but I get to the point sometimes I say, I don't have the mental capacity to handle that today. I just don't. I woke up not feeling that well, not doing, I don't want to deal with. And it's okay to say no. And people know me now that if Vernon Hines said, I ain't doing it, then we're going to leave him, we're going to let him be. Because you get to a point where you feel overwhelmed and you feel like you have to. Because in the military, it was like, you don't say no, you do it. It's the mission. You got to get the mission. No, that was life or death. Now, this is my life or death. No, I'm not going to do it.
That's good advice, Bernard. I mean, you always hear that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. So when you can't do it, it's okay to say no. I love that. Okay. Jen, what would you say?
So 2 things, and just to foot stomp on what you both have said, to not be hard on yourself. Life's messy. I mean, it just is. And so, you know, raking yourself through the coals because, well, you know, you got to give yourself grace and mercy. I mean, that's the only thing. And I think we forget that. And the second thing is, when I was going through this resilience training, I had an instructor who said, so we talk about spiritual resilience, and for me, like you all, faith is at the center of my spiritual resilience. But he was very clear that, hey, whatever is at the center of it needs to be strong enough, because that's like the last leg standing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when everything's stripped away, your mental, your physical strength, your emotional strength, what you have left, that sense of purpose and your values, that's the last leg standing. And I would go as far as to say that's grit. When we talk about grit with respect to resilience, that's the stuff. And I'll tell you, what caught me, because I didn't have the answer. I didn't know how long the storm was sticking around. I didn't have the answer to my trauma during that second deployment in Iraq, Kuwait, Iraq. And yet I kept tripping over that sense of purpose and those values and in my faith. And that's what kept me alive. I actually delayed my suicide. I'm not lying. I had it planned. I go, I'm going to do it on Tuesday. Oh, wait, I can't do it on Tuesday because I'm supposed to fly a mission. I'm supposed to be in the operations center. And it sounds silly, but at the same time, I was tripping over my values. Like, I don't want to let the team down. So I kept rescheduling my suicide. So I think that as far as resilience, that's one of the places that we least put attention to. But that faith, those core values, that sense of purpose, that's what I kept tripping over until I finally found the stuff, the mechanisms, the healing, the knowledge, the therapy that would start to clear out that trauma.
So. Thank goodness you did, Jen. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so important that we have our values at the core in the forefront. You guys are amazing. I am so appreciative to all of you, Bernard and Nicole and Jen, for sharing with us today about your experience in the military and with mental health. Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of Brave TV. And also, thank you guys for your service to our country. So grateful. Something else I want to mention before we sign off is that This Is My Brave does have a partnership with BetterHelp.com. So if you're looking for trying out an online therapy tool, we don't get anything out of it. It's just a resource we share. You can go to BetterHelp.com/thisismybrave and get set up with a therapist. So it's an offer available to all of our viewers. Thank you again to Nicole, Bernard, and Jen for being with us, and for everyone tuning in. Join us next week for Brave TV episode 14, where we talk about the Movember movement and men's mental health. Thanks, guys.